In 2006, Square Enix promised us a tragedy before it was stripped down, rescoped, and forced out the door as Final Fantasy 15 Versus XIII promised a generation of fans something that the franchise has spent the last decade running away from. A somber, midnight blue avant-garde world where fantasy met reality through a lens of dark, psychological grief. It felt like Final Fantasy was finally going to grow up alongside the people who played it. But when a multi-billion-dollar publisher leaves a creative vacuum that massive, the passion doesn't just evaporate, it starts a global diaspora. While mainstream companies spent the next decade chasing homogenized corporate trend slop, a generation of independent developers traumatized by the heartbreak of what Versus XIII could have been decided to build that vision for themselves. Fast forward to the present day, and the absolute apex of this rebellion has arrived. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has completely taken the world by storm. It swept the Game Awards, triggered massive critical waves, and became the undisputed savior of a genre that major publishers claimed was dead. Mainstream audiences and AAA studios alike reacted as if this AstroTurf Unreal Engine slop was a completely backwards approach to game design and left them bewildered once it swept the Game Awards. But it wasn't. The staggering multi-million unit success of Expedition 33 is the final triumphant stage of a decade-long evolution. It is the crown jewel built atop a mountain of risk, corporate defection, and creative experimentation. To understand how a French studio managed to completely conquer a genre created and monopolized by Japan, we have to look back to the developers who first abandoned their safety nets, look into the abyss of an untested market, and willingly stepped into the line of fire. Because before Expedition 33 could run, a completely different, deeply flawed, and heavily maligned French JRPG had to clumsily clear the path ahead by hand. When Sandfall Interactive pulled back the curtain on Clair Obscur Expedition 33 during the 2024 Xbox Games Showcase, mainstream audiences and AAA publishers alike reacted as if this high-fidelity, mechanically brilliant turn-based JRPG has miraculously materialized out of thin air. The truth is far more calculated. Sandfall didn't just guess there was a market for this kind of game. They watched Midgar Studio prove it. They saw Edge of Eternity stumble through the mud, capture a modest but fiercely loyal grassroots audience, and demonstrate that the financial appetite for a European-made turn-based epic was entirely real. Edge of Eternity was the raw, unpolished thesis statement that allowed Expedition 33 to secure its funding. But where Midgar Studio had to build their engine pipeline from scratch, Sandfall Interactive's core team brought a razor-sharp administrative precision of veteran Ubisoft expatriates. They sidestepped the catastrophic tech bottlenecks that traditionally sink independent projects. They skipped the experimentation phase, built straight into Unreal Engine 5, and weaponized a brilliant viral marketing partnership with Kepler Interactive. Kepler didn't just market the game, they blasted it directly into the feeds of a hungry, neglected demographic, engineering a massive positive feedback loop that sustained the title from its explosive reveal all the way to its historic sweep at the Game Awards. By the time the dust settled, Expedition 33 wasn't just a beloved indie darling. It had mutated into the global cultural phenomenon, securing a universal critical acclaim. The secret to its staggering success lays in its refusal to compromise on the artistry of the past. While mainstream giants like Square Enix spent the last decade frantically chasing action combat trends, Expedition 33 boldly dug its heels into the absolute peak of 7th generation turn-based design. It didn't just nostalgia bait those mechanics, it mutated them. It took Lost Odyssey's iconic ring timing system and evolved it into a flawless high-stakes real-time parry mechanic. It grabbed the tactical firearm dynamics of Persona 5 and expanded them into a beautifully layered reactive combat suite. It proved that turn-based gameplay didn't need to be abandoned to feel modern. It just needed to be built upon the people who actually loved the genre. But the ultimate triumph of Expedition 33, the element that transformed it from a great mechanical playground into an undisputable masterpiece, was its narrative execution. Its lead writer entered the industry from a completely non-traditional background, transitioning into game writing after a career in finance and a series of radically distinct life experiences. That complete lack of safe, homogenized corporate game writing habits allowed her to construct a script that felt staggeringly, heartbreakingly human. The dialogue possessed a level of grounded reality that modern AAA writing completely lacks. The absolute moment you step into the game and witness its first major conversation with Lune upon arriving at the Paintress's domain, the entire medium shifts. The weight of the responsibility, the quiet dread of the character dynamics, and the razor-sharp dialogue didn't just feel like a collection of video game tropes. It felt like a profound testament to what interactive storytelling can actually achieve when it's guided by a pure, unadulterated passion. Expedition 33 single-handedly resurrected a genre that the rest of the industry claimed was dead. It did so by walking down a path that had been cleared year after year by the failures and lessons of developers who came before them. To fully comprehend why France became the unexpected battle-hardened savior of the traditional turn-based JRPG, you have to look past the code and examine how French culture fundamentally absorbs, dissects, and reinvents Japanese media. In Japan, mainstream storytelling is utterly obsessed with the high school lifestyle. The endless sea of slice-of-life anime and school-uniform JRPG protagonists isn't just an aesthetic quirk. It's a reflection of the rigid cultural reality. There is the quiet structural understanding that once a young person enters the exhausting hyper-conformist corporate workforce, their individual freedom and youth are functionally over. High school represents the absolute peak of personal agency, but that specific thematic anxiety doesn't translate the same way into Western audiences. In places like United States and France, creators and audiences gravitate heavily toward postmodernism, existentialism, and avant-garde art. France in particular maintains a deep historical relationship with a very specific flavor of high art somberness. Look at the architectural elegance, the midnight blacks, and the melancholic silhouettes of haute couture houses like Christian Dior. That precise wavelength where tragic elegance meets everyday reality is exactly what Final Fantasy Versus XIII was promising in those early smoke-filled trailers. It's why its subsequent corporate cancellation and transformation into fragmented open-world bromance hit the French independent scene like a physical blow. They didn't just want to play that game, they were culturally hardwired to understand its artistic intent. This deep-rooted obsession created a hyper-distinct subculture of Japanese adoration within France, but it manifested in a completely different way, unique from the rest of the West. When America falls in love with Japanese aesthetics, it typically channels it into westernized structural clones. Think Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Boondocks. They are brilliant, but they remain fundamentally rooted in American animation traditions. France, on the other hand, builds creative bridges that merge directly into the native medium itself. Look at Code Lyoko, a beautifully bizarre blending of virtual reality and school drama. Look at Radiant, a French-authored comic that managed to be so structurally authentic it was adapted back into native Japanese anime. This isn't just Westerners playing dress-up, it was an entirely separate cultural movement known as Franga, or French manga. The French creative community doesn't just consume the Japanese aesthetic at a surface level, they actively weaponize their passion to forge a parallel, competitive, artistic ecosystem. And by the late 2010s, that exact subculture passion was on a direct collision course with widespread Western corporate exhaustion. For the better part of a decade, Ubisoft has systematically run its own creative reputation into the dirt, transforming from an industry trendsetter into an automated factory line that forces immense talent to churn out safe, homogenized, creatively bankrupt, microtransaction-laden AAA sandbox slop. When you work inside that environment, your artistic passion is actively ground down to serve a live service-esque spreadsheet. Leaving a titan of that scale is a terrifying prospect. It means walking away from total financial security, guaranteed health benefits, and a steady corporate pipeline to jump into the volatile abyss of independent development. For any rational creator, it feels like professional suicide. But these developers had a rebellion to mount, and they possess a massive advantage that the standard indie teams rarely have. When these veteran expatriates broke free and gained total creative autonomy, they brought a lethal combination to the table. An intense, burning, long-dormant passion of the golden era of 7th generation JRPGs backed by the rigorous, hard-earned technical know-how required to actually ship a massive video game from the ground up. They already understood the microscopic logistics of an asset management, physics engines, and production pipelines. The catch? They only had the courage to take that terrifying leap because someone else had already stepped into the line of fire. Long before Sandfall Studio could run with Unreal Engine 5, a tiny team in Montpellier had to clumsily clear the path by hand. Every single flaw that plagues the final release of Edge of Eternity can be traced back to a lethal intersection of 3 foundational roadblocks: unchecked creative scope, a microscopic budget, and severe engine constraints. When Midgar Studio took their pitch to Kickstarter back in 2015, they managed to catch lightning in a bottle, generating massive grassroots hype that easily cleared their funding goals. The campaign blew past its milestones so quickly that they unlocked an elite tier of stretch goals, allowing the team to secure the legendary Yasunori Mitsuda to compose for the project. Game developers driven by pure passion always want to promise the world to their backers, and you never truly grasp the logistical horror of your own scope until you're actively sinking in the thick of it. Great games are traditionally spawned from smart, elegant limitations, but Edge of Eternity completely refused to limit itself. The game desperately needed to be a tight, focused, linear narrative experience. Instead, the developers opted to build a massive, sprawling 3D open world. The absolute moment you hit the first major city after completing the lengthy tutorial section, the illusion completely shatters. While it is undeniably impressive from a technical standpoint that a handful of people managed to construct an urban environment of that visual scale on a shoestring budget, the pretty veneer cracks the second you try to interact with it. The city and the massive maps surrounding it are entirely devoid of actual substance. The side quests are agonizingly generic. Go here, fetch that, kill 10 of those, busy work. The basic character movement feels incredibly clunky, and the dialogue reads like it was written by a team that simply lacked the structural narrative experience required to pull off a sweeping high-stakes political epic. Worse yet, the game commits a cardinal JRPG sin. It strands you with only 2 party members for sprawling multi-hour stretches of the campaign. In a genre that relies heavily on a vibrant, diverse cast of characters bouncing off one another, this choice is completely fatal. It totally kills the classic on-the-road found family dynamic, and it exposes the absolute exhausting repetition of the combat loop. The turn-based grid system actually featured some genuinely novel, brilliant ideas regarding positional movement and tactical placement, but a mechanical novelty cannot carry a 30-hour runtime when the core gameplay loop isn't engaging enough to keep you coming back. On top of everything else, they were actively fighting their own tools. Midgar Studio built Edge of Eternity on the Unity engine during a development cycle that spun up around 2018. For a tiny team attempting to render an ambitious high-fidelity 3D open world, Unity was simply the wrong choice for the job at that time. It was an engine not suited for a small team with a limited budget attempting a game of this immense scale, leaving the final release feeling like a budget title from 2014 that accidentally launched in 2021. At the end of the day, it was an objective painful 6 out of 10. You hit the 5-hour mark, realize there are far better games in your backlog, and turn it off. But it was a necessary 6 out of 10. It was the blood sacrifice that proved that the production pipeline could exist, paving the way for the studio to completely reinvent themselves. If Edge of Eternity was a desperate attempt to catch the fading ghost of Final Fantasy XV, Midgar Studios' next step proves they didn't just wallow in their shortcomings. Enter Edge of Memories. The jump in quality from their first game to this brief 2-hour demo is staggering. They completely abandoned the washed-out, pseudo-realistic art style that the Unity engine struggled to render, opting instead for a highly stylized, beautiful anime cel-shaded look. They looked past their limitations dead in the eye, expanded their core team from 5 developers to around 20, and did something completely unprecedented for a studio of their size. They brute forced their artistry by hiring a development team full of JRPG titans. We aren't just talking about Yasunori Mitsuda returning to compose the final theme. They also brought on the legendary character designer Raita Kazuma from Xenoblade Chronicles X, singer Emmy Evans from Nier, composer Marian Abunasser from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and crucially lead writer Sawako Natori of the Drakengard and Nier series. You can feel that shift in the entire foundational premise. Edge of Memories isn't chasing Final Fantasy anymore. It is a blatant, gorgeous spiritual successor to Tales of Berseria. The protagonist, Aline, serves as a direct stand-in for Velvet Crow, traveling a world infected by creeping corrosion alongside her companion, Ysurus. The snappy real-time combat, the richer colors, and the sheer quality of the dialogue banter are leaps and bounds ahead of where Edge of Eternity left off. Is it a brute force of artistry paying established legends to match their indie constraints? Or is it a genuine hard-earned evolution of passion? It's a bit of both. While Notori's signature Draken Nier Edge might take a full game to truly unveil itself, the presence of a professional writer at the helm is immediately felt. Midgar Studios shifted away from the bloated open-world busywork to a tighter, snappier, and more polished gameplay loop. It is a textbook example of a developer actively listening to criticism and narrowing their scope and turning a rough draft into a sleeper hit. It feels like a modern rendition of a 7th generation classic, built by a small team utilizing Unreal Engine 5. And if that specific pipeline sounds familiar, it should. There is a profound poetic irony of how this entire decade-long timeline closes. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 does not exist in a corporate vacuum. It exists out of pure, unadulterated creative spite. It is a direct, localized rebellion against a multi-billion-dollar titan like Square Enix and Ubisoft, both companies that have systematically run their own reputation into the floor, squandering legacy intellectual properties, mismanaging immense pools of creative talent, and wasting millions of dollars on capital on uninspired, creatively bankrupt corporate slop like Forspoken and Skull and Bones. But that spite didn't manifest as an empty internet whining. It mutated into a global diaspora of pure localized passion. The phantom heartbreak of a cancelled PlayStation 3 game's trailer from 2006 trickled into the minds of creators all over the world. It acted as a creative catalyst, forcing independent French developers to look into the abyss of a completely untested market, to abandon their safe corporate jobs and dare to create the epics they wanted to see themselves. This isn't a story where a French JRPG scene completely overthrows or replaces the native Japanese market, since a French JRPG is a niche of a niche of a niche. Not even the global heights of French anime or the entire medium of franga have ever achieved that kind of mainstream dominance. Expedition 33 is simply a standout, historic magnum opus that managed to completely transcend its own niche. But it didn't cross the finish line alone. Edge of Eternity is a deeply flawed, exhausting 6 out of 10 video game. You do not need to finish it. You do not need to force yourself through its empty maps, and you certainly do not need to glaze its severe mechanical shortcomings. But you must respect its existence. In its clunky movement, its overscoped design, and its Noctis clone of a protagonist, it provided the essential structural blueprint. It was a mandatory, painful, blood, sweat, and tears sacrifice, a necessary failure that cleared the mud and proved that the pipeline was viable, so that a masterpiece could eventually walk across the finish line.